All right, let's dive into Leviticus chapter 10. Today, we're looking at a passage that is, well, it's pretty terrifying, but it's also deeply instructive. It's a moment that really defines the holiness of God and what it means to actually approach Him.
We're actually going to start right at the story's shocking climax because you have to feel the weight of this. Just try to picture the scene. Two of Israel's very first priests, right in the middle of their sacred duties, are suddenly consumed by fire. And not from an enemy, but from the very God they were consecrated to serve. It's a terrifying and absolutely pivotal moment. So you have to ask, right? What on earth could these men have possibly done to deserve such a swift and devastating judgment? To even begin to understand why this happened, we've got to know who they were and the sacred role they had just been given. And this is so important. This wasn't God striking down some outsiders or enemies of Israel. No, this was a tragedy that struck right at the very heart of Israel's spiritual leadership. Nadab and Abihu were Aaron's oldest sons, newly ordained and set apart for God's service. And get this happened on the very day the priesthood was inaugurated, a day that should have been all about celebration and divine blessing.
The scripture tells us the catastrophe was triggered by a single act. They took their censers, they put fire in them, laid incense on it, and offered strange fire before the Lord. Okay, so strange fire. What in the world does that actually mean?
Well, the thing is, the Bible doesn't spell it out for us in a simple one-sentence definition. And, I think that's significant. It kind of forces us to dig a little deeper, to really look at the context and the principles God had already set up to get the full gravity of their sin. So while we might not know the exact mechanical detail, all these possibilities really point back to the same root problem: unauthorized worship. The fire was strange because, well, it was their idea, not God's. The text says it was something which He commanded them not. So whether it was using the wrong source of fire, offering it at the wrong time, or maybe having a heart filled with pride, maybe even clouded by alcohol, the fundamental sin was treating the holy things of God casually and putting their own will above His clear commands. So in the face of this absolute horror, with his two nephews lying dead, Moses gives his brother Aaron a divine explanation. And this explanation becomes a foundational principle for anyone who would ever approach God in worship. Okay, now this is God's own reason for His severe judgment spoken through Moses. He's saying that His holiness is not a casual matter. For those who have the privilege to come near Him, the priests, that standard is even higher. They, above all people, must treat Him as holy. They must sanctify Him in their actions and set the right example for everyone else. So, here's the bottom line. Being in God's presence requires a response of absolute reverence and obedience. It's not a place for us to just wing it or do what feels right to us. To sanctify God means to recognize His awesome otherness and to worship Him on His terms, not our own. And this next part, this is just heavy. God gives an almost unbearable command to Aaron and his remaining sons: do not perform the traditional rites of mourning for your dead sons and brothers. And Aaron's response? It's staggering. In the face of his own personal, crushing grief, the scripture simply says, and Aaron held his peace. It's this moment of silent, stoic, and just heartbreaking submission to the righteousness of God. After something so tragic, God doesn't just leave it at a warning. He immediately gives Aaron and his remaining sons new, explicit instructions to make sure a tragedy like this can never, ever happen again. And just look at the very first thing God says. It's a prohibition on alcohol before entering the tabernacle. I mean, that's a huge clue, right? It strongly suggests that impaired judgment was at the heart of Nadab and Abihu's sin. God is making it crystal clear. Those who serve Him need sober, clear minds to do their work, to be able to tell the difference between what's holy and what's not, and to faithfully teach His ways to the people. But you know what's incredible? The chapter doesn't just end on this harsh, heavy note of judgment. Instead, it wraps up with this really fascinating and honestly compassionate moment between Moses and Aaron that shows you the heart behind all the rules. So Moses, who was always zealous for God's law, he notices another detail that seems out of place. The priests were supposed to eat their portion of the sin offering, but in all their grief, they burned it all up instead. From where Moses is standing, on a day already marked by disobedience, this looks like another violation, and he gets angry. But then Aaron steps in and defends his sons.
And his reply is just so profound. He essentially asks, after the tragedy that has struck my family today, would it have been fitting if I had forced myself to eat this holy meal with a heart shattered by grief? Would God have accepted that as true worship? He appealed to the spirit of the law, not just the letter.
And wow, this is such an important moment. Moses, the lawgiver himself, he understands. He recognizes that Aaron's heart wasn't in rebellion, it was simply broken. This final interaction shows us that God's law isn't just a set of cold, unfeeling rules. It operates with wisdom and compassion, taking into account the realities of our human experience. So after all that, what do we walk away with from this powerful chapter? Well, first, we learn that God's holiness is an awesome, non-negotiable reality. We learn that true worship is obedient worship, centered on His commands, not our bright ideas. We see the immense responsibility that comes with spiritual leadership. And then in this beautiful twist, we see that this holy God isn't distant. He understands our pain and our weakness.
And all of this really leaves us with a big, timeless question to wrestle with. The story of Nadab and Abihu challenges us to hold two massive truths in balance: a deep, reverent awe for the holiness of God, and a compassionate understanding for our own human weakness and the weakness of others. And that's a tension that continues to shape our faith and practice today.